Okay, and we are recording. Our chair, Krista Campbell, is in a remote location this morning. And not even in digital communications. So I'll be chairing the meeting, filling in, and we'll call the meeting to order. And so first thing, not sure whether we have, I think we do have a couple of members of the public here, and I will open it to general public comment. But I'll say, looking ahead on the agenda, we have two items. One is a public hearing on our biennial budget. And the second is a continued discussion from our last week's special meeting on Lopez for the Watmau edition. And we will take public comments separately for those two items. So other than that, I would open it to general public comment. Is there any?
Kathy Morris.
Kathy, good morning. Kathy?
Morning. I would like to bring the attention to the Land Bank that there is a TILF conference going on next month in October. And I think it would be great to have the Land Bank, the San Juan County Land Bank, represented by some of the stewards. The cost is pretty affordable, and it's held in Port Townsend this year. And so it's a great way to learn about working agricultural lands with other farmers and land managers in the area. So it's the TILF conference, and it's in Port Townsend, October, the weekend just before Halloween. So I mentioned it to Peter Guiazet. I said, it'd be great if you guys could go, like send somebody from the Land Bank. So anyway, that's my comment.
Great. Thank you very much, Kathy. And perhaps if you could send a link, if there's a pre-registration required, if you could send a link to Tanya, probably she'll share it with the rest of the commission and staff.
Okay, will do.
Thanks. Okay, any other public comment? Hearing and seeing none, we'll move on to approval of the August 18th, our last regular meeting minutes. Commissioners, any comments? Hearing none. I have one comment. Let's see, middle of the second page of the minutes, I guess it was the third page. Under the Watmau Bay Preserve edition, the minutes say, take public input regarding the possible sale of Watmau Bay edition to the Bureau of Land Management. I think that the meeting was really about a lot more than that. And so I would suggest saying to take public input regarding future disposition and management of the Watmau Bay Preserve. Okay.
I make the motion that we approve the minutes as amended by Brian.
Okay, thank you.
I'll second that.
I don't think we need a vote on it, but thank you. So the August 18th minutes stand approved. Chair and commissioners reports. Commissioners? Gee, we're quiet this morning.
I'll comment on when we get to the Watmau discussion.
Go ahead.
Always.
Oh, okay. Well, hearing nothing else, I'll have to say something. I made a visit to the new Watmau Bay Edition property a couple of weeks ago. It's reflected in the stewardship report. What the report didn't mention is that Commissioner Peggy Bill also made that trip, and both Peggy and Amanda hosted me and showed me around and provided a lot of good information, and I'm grateful for that. And the property is spectacular. So appreciate it. Thank you. Okay, nothing else? Anybody?
Well, I wanted to thank Amanda for the tour that we had when we were in Lopez last week of the, new Spencer's property. That was great. And it was particularly interesting to me because I got to walk on it before the trail was built, which was way harder than walking on it the other day. It was really, really nice to see it completed. Thank you.
Okay. Moving on then, see. Kathleen Foley is here, for the San Juan Preservation Trust and a partner update.
Good morning,
Kathleen?
everybody. Thanks, Brian. Yeah, just quick update from the San Juan Preservation Trust. First off, just want to talk about the ongoing Katy Mountain Edition fundraising effort. We have an October 21st deadline for a matching grant, and so we're still overall about $244,000 short. And so if we can raise 122 of that by October 21st, then those funds will be matched. So I know I brought this up last time, but again, just really want to emphasize the need for continued just conversations around your community members to let them know that this is an ongoing campaign and that this dual layer of protection for these kinds of properties are really important. And realistically, the land bank needs to work with the trust on this to make sure that these projects can come to fruition. Just help spread the word if you can, that we still have that October 21st deadline. In addition to that, we've got our annual fundraising campaign. This is just our annual campaign we do for our general operating budget, and we will be featuring the North Shore project in the general fundraising ask letter. So be looking for that. That'll start, those letters will go out in November. And then just last week, about half of the staff from the trust were down in Portland for the annual Land Trust Alliance national rally. These are held every year and all over the US, and it was one of the largest rallies held certainly in recent years because of COVID, but I think there's a little over 2,000 people attending. Obviously they're made up of workshops and seminars, and we just, learn a lot about kind of the latest best practices in land trust work. One thing that was kind of really great this year is part of the rally hosted a tribal land conservation summit. And there were 80 or so Indigenous leaders from all over the US present to really continue the discussion about working with tribal governments on access and restoration practices and all the different things that we're talking about locally. So definitely a nationwide trend here that a lot of land trusts are focusing on. So that's really cool. Let's see, I think that's all I have. Does anyone have any questions?
I do. Are there any kind of notes or recordings or anything of that discussion, the tribal lands conservation discussion?
Yeah, there was actually a lot, Peggy. There were held over a bunch of different seminars. So if there's a particular, specific topic you're interested, whether that be, land bank or cultural access or, restoration practices or whatever, I could direct you to those particular seminars.
Okay. I'll think on it.
Kathleen, that would be great. And I think that we're all interested in the same thing. So if there's anything that you could put together or find another way to share with us in person, we would appreciate it.
Okay.
I don't know, did any staff go to the trust meeting this year?
No.
Yeah, it was so close.
Were there
Okay,
any
now-
tribes, were there any tribes from our region who were there?
You know, I didn't meet anybody from our area. That doesn't mean that they weren't there, but I mean, it was pretty incredible representation. But I can go back through the conference agenda and pick out the things that I think might be most pertinent for Land Bank folks and pull that together.
That would be great, Kathleen. Thank you.
No
Okay.
problem.
And I'm thinking maybe we could put out a little news blurb on the trust's fundraising efforts for Katy and for the North Shore. That's obviously to our mutual benefit. So hopefully we can work together on that. Kathleen, thanks.
Yeah, thank you. We appreciate any support you can give.
Okay. Normally at this point, we have the county council update. I understand that council member Minnie has been called away on a family emergency, may be able to join us later in person or virtually. So we'll make room for her if that does happen. And we're moving right along. So we're early. Aaron, you ready to do a budget update?
I think Lincoln does the.
Yeah, if you can pull up the spreadsheets.
Before you pull up the spreadsheet, I have a question, on the memo.
Sure.
And one thing you talk about is the 600,000 sale of land includes Entrance Mountain, Arshka, Katy, and San Juan Alderman. Is the Entrance Mountain, is that property been sold?
No.
So what's happening? So that's the one you look at on the ferry that's above Dobay kind of.
Right, so the Entrance Mountain property in question, we own, really, we own 4 parcels up there. 3 of them are connected, so the part that you see, the 2 humps and the part in between, we're not talking about that. There was a 4th parcel, which is a 10-acre parcel, which is to the north of that, which when it was purchased was slated to become part of the conservation buyer program.
Right.
And we carried it forward. And now what we're looking at doing is reselling that with a Forever Wild conservation easement on it. We have a neighbor who's interested. Obviously, we'll have to get it out to the public. The council will have to make a decision on what kind of sale they want to do. But we do have an agreed upon price. We are having an appraisal done. We have some details that we're working through with regard to some of the things they would like to have in conjunction with the sale. So it's not quite ready for prime time, but we're moving along.
But it is ongoing.
It is ongoing.
Negotiation. Good, okay.
That's what.
I had the same question about the same comment, but about the sale of land, including the 1.715 billion for the North Shore CE. And I think I understand what that is. It's an anticipated revenue from the trust, but it's not really, I think it shouldn't be characterized as a sale of land. Now, this memo is probably for the commission and not part of the budget, so maybe it doesn't matter, but I just thought that that should be clarified. We're not really selling off any of the North Shore.
Yeah, that's a good clarification, Brian. I think we put it in there just as a matter of course, but it is the sale of a property interest.
Yes,
It is not the sale of the underlying fee title of the property.
I just thought it should be clarified a little more.
Well, that would hold for the, issue of $600,000 sale of easements on interest. Well, that's land, but Hauschka and Alderman are easement. I don't know about the Alderman property.
Okay, so the Alderman property is another one we've held for a really long time. It's on Baylor Hill Road.
Yeah, I
It's a
didn't-
10-acre tract
Mhm.
that has been farmed. It's adjacent to Tor Black's property and now his son's property and wife's property. And we've wanted to resell that for quite some time also, and also with a Forever Wild conservation easement on it. So that's what we're moving forward with and having appraised. And that sale will have to be advertised, obviously. But the likely purchaser would be a neighbor, and probably one of the family members. We'll just have to see, and obviously, we're obligated to get at least appraised value for it.
Is that farmland?
It is farmland.
I have a general comment. I don't know if this is time to make it, but this is a new commissioner comment. So please, allow me. I believe, and tell me if I'm wrong, that this is the place that the public finds its detail on our budget proposals for next year. And the more clear it can be, something like this exact point we just talked about, it seems important to me. In my previous life, I had a lot of experience working with the county's budget process, which I ended up writing the entire budget in a different format and then forcing it into the county's, little pigeonholes. But that was in order to make it abundantly clear to the public what was actually happening. I just wonder, I know Aaron doesn't have an extra 5 minutes in his life, but just going forward, I'm wondering if we can kind of keep that as a goal.
Yeah. No, I mean, there's definitely a balance between, knowing that this is a budget and stewardship, for instance, all their projects are all anticipated. I could share a spreadsheet with 150 projects that are planned, but those are kind of the inner workings. So there's definitely a balance between what we feel is we're confident enough in to share with the public that it's not been changing all the time and, hold that for ourselves. So there's definitely that sweet spot and we're always working to adjust these to show as much transparency as possible and making them clear for everybody to understand.
There might not be any nerds left in the public besides me, but it seems to me that the place that the public can increase to understand the organization and looking at the budget and the annual report. And so those, I think we should just go overboard with these towns and make them really simple and explanatory.
Yeah, of course.
Without causing any big headaches.
Yeah, I think Brian at the last quarterly meeting, you suggested that we use this memo template along with the budget, which is new for us. It's something that we didn't do before. We just shared the expenditure acquisition plan and then had a presentation. So this is a little bit more of that itemized detail from within the individual budget line items, and we can always improve and add on that as we go.
And Aaron, as far as I'm concerned, you've been very responsive to that, and this has been very helpful.
Okay.
But just one other thing to clarify that it's my understanding that the memo that we're looking at now is for the commission and not a formal part of the budget submittal, isn't that right?
Yeah, I mean, it's a public document.
Sure.
But it is tailored for the commission's
Yeah.
understanding of projects. Yes.
Thanks. Okay, so.
Well, I'll add one more general comment,
Okay.
because Brian and I were talking on the ferry. I would love to meet with Aaron and whoever else is interested and just have kind of a little more a deep dive tutorial into how you're doing the budget and anybody else wants to do that.
Yeah, this
And
one's
that-
kind of funny because, I had about 2 days to put this together. Normally we start this in July. So I had 2 days to kind of pull all of this together. So it's, it's definitely, this is the best. This is our budget. There will be, potential little tweaks here and there. But in terms of budgeting overall, I'm always more than happy to field calls and meetings whenever anybody's interested,
Good job,
of
Brian.
course.
Thanks.
Yeah.
And just to amplify a
So-
little bit what Peggy was saying.
Can't see, I think Sandy has a question.
Well,
I-
okay, I'll recognize Sandy in a moment. It occurred to me that many years ago now, I asked the same thing that Peggy is saying, and Judy took some time, and took me and maybe a couple of others aside and explained some of the ins and outs of the budget, which was extremely helpful, and I got a number of things that I hadn't gotten before. So when Peggy made her comment to me earlier, I realized that we now have 3 new commissioners on board. And Mike, who's actually taking over the treasurer's job, from Doug. So it'd probably benefit all of us to do that, even if we need to extend a meeting or have a special meeting and just focus on the nuts and bolts budget stuff. I think it would be helpful.
I think it's a great idea. And in fact, something that Aaron and I did when I first became treasurer, because these are not easy things to understand.
Yeah.
And the headlines and the text isn't all explanatory either to these things. But I think it ought to be a regular thing we do with every year with new commissioners, and we probably ought to start with the ones we just did. So I know Aaron's happy to do that, and he's well versed with this stuff. A lot of this stuff is given to us by the county, which you will understand too. So you start talking about raises and stuff like that, that's baked in before we even start. So anyway, so I think it's a great idea. Just, work within a schedule. Get a lot of stuff we're doing.
Let's call that a plan then.
Of course.
Okay, Sandy, please.
Yes, a couple of comments about this. So I agree with Marilyn. I want to support having the memo be, which is fantastic. I love it, Aaron. Have it be slightly more explanatory, as it is a public document, and if someone, it is geared towards the commission, but a member of the public should be able to somewhat follow the most important parts. And one of those things would be acronyms, like the CE. I mean, I know that CE is very common, but anyways, just watch the acronyms. And then question on page 1 of that memo under 2024 and 2025, where it says REIT revenue reduced to, I hope it's not 375,000. No, we should change that to be 3.75 million on both of those. And then on 2025, the sale of lands includes 1.715 million for the North Shore CE. And I'm wondering, was that sounds like a different amount than I remember. And so I'm wondering, did we have the appraisal for that?
I can speak to that. The appraisal has been done, but we haven't seen the finished report yet. So we don't have the actual number just yet.
Okay, so Lincoln, is that the amount that we have had in our plan?
No, and I'm trying to think this through now. It's obviously something that I need to revisit. But the agreement with the Preservation Trust is basically for 50% of the purchase price. So we definitely have some things missing in here that we have to go back and take a look at. And that's part of the quick turnaround time. And this is a good opportunity for you to catch these major errors. So we'll take another look at that.
It's 3.75. Is that right? What is the reach reduced to what?
Okay.
Because I see in here,
REIT reduction, currently the REIT is at 4 million.
right, I see that,
We're going down to 3,750,000.
right. So that's,
So that's that first number.
right.
What Sandy's asking about is the repayment for the North Shore.
Right, I got that.
Yes, we'll take another shot at that. Frankly, I had anticipated that given the quick turnaround time for this, we were gonna have to come back again next month for final approval of the budget. So we expected there were gonna be some blips in this, or more than blips.
Because
So
it seems like that's a very specific number
Yeah.
that was generated from somewhere.
Yeah, it's
So
not,
that's
it just does not have to do with the appraisal.
Okay. All right,
We just-
and then in terms of, okay. See, just before you let me go, let me just check my list here. Okay, I think that covers it.
Thank you, Cindy. Marilyn had another question.
Just one other comment, another new commissioner, don't know how things are done comment. I wonder, since all of us commissioners don't cost anything to go to a meeting for the land bank, I wonder if it's worthwhile having a special meeting budget session sometime before we get to this point in the future. I mean, I know we're talking a couple of years down the road, but just to digest the proposal, obviously a public meeting, but so that we don't take up all this regular meeting time.
Yeah, in the past, there has been, the draft proposal that was shared with the commission prior to the meeting for the public hearing. Given this, because of the whole collective bargaining agreement with the union, that's what kind of pushed this back so far. So that's kind of the context of why we're doing this so late. And then we have like an October 10th public hearing or department meeting with the council. So we have this small window to get commission approval before we send it to that stage. So it's all just a very compressed process this year, and in moving forward in other years, or when we revisit the biennium midway through going into 2024, we'll do a review of the expenditure and acquisition plan. We can do that at the meeting prior, and then do the proposal with the public hearing the following month. Similar to what we're doing here, we're just compressing, and then, we'll come back next month with adjustments and updates.
Actually, Sandy, let me go back to your question too, now that I'm maybe a little bit more awake. That number for the Preservation Trust is actually accurate, because you have to remember that when we made the purchase, the trust brought 1.5 million to the table. So that money we already have, and so this basically represents the other half of the 50% that they had committed to for the purchase of the property. So all is well.
Thank you. Thank you for clarifying that.
And the 37,000 or 37,000, that is a memo mistake, but in the budget here before you, it is at 3,750,000.
We're being really conservative.
Yeah, the memo, yes, there's a typo, but in the actual proposal here, we do have it as 3.75. just for clarity.
Good catches, everyone. Now that we've had a discussion of the budget, maybe we should let Lincoln do a presentation and give us the information.
Sure. Like at my peril, I think. Okay, just running through this. We have two budgets, as you all know. One is the Conservation Area Fund budget. And then there's the Stewardship and Management Fund budget. So we'll go through the Conservation Area Fund first. That's all of our revenue that's generated comes into the Conservation Area Fund. What we've been doing is funding stewardship out of the Conservation Area Fund revenues. So you'll see that as we work our way through this. Okay, so first thing, beginning net cash, 6.2 million. Sorry, let me go to 2024. Or 2023. So in 2023, as you work your way across these columns, you come to the 2023 projected totals. So we're projecting to end up with a little bit more than 5 million this year. As you can see, for 2024 and 2025, those numbers continue to go up. That's principally because we do not have any acquisitions slated other than the one that we're paying off, the Hauschka Katy Mountain property. And we'll come to the property purchase numbers later. But I just wanted to make that clear. That's the trajectory of the ending cash. And I'll just continue working my way down. So the first number I want you to focus on is that 3.75 million number. We currently have a budget of 4 million for our real estate excise tax revenue. And we're reducing that to 3.75. The way it's looking this year, we may make that 4 million. It's an open question. We'll see how the rest of the year goes. But it seemed prudent to reduce it because I think we may come in a little bit under, and it's probably worth it just to knock that number down a little bit in anticipation of next year being kind of like this too. And so we're keeping that the same in 2025. Obviously, jumping out an additional year, we really have no idea, but that's what we're putting down on paper at this point. So that covers that part of revenue. We've talked about the sale of land. So I'm going to just go down this 2024 budget column here about additional revenue. We have slated 1.5 million in grants for acquisition. Those are related to the Watmow property, and that is also dependent on the commission's decision about whether to retain that property or resell to the BLM. If the resale is going to happen, we won't be receiving that grant revenue next year. Instead, we'll be receiving the full purchase price. We're not sure when that would be, probably in 2 years, maybe 2026. I don't have a good handle on that. But the way it's set up right now, we have those grant revenues in there now. We'll continue to talk about that and move toward making a decision on that question next month. The 250,000 below that relates to purchase of water rights at Cascade Creek. And that's also a big open question. We don't know. We've been kind of at a standstill with that one for some time, as Rosario has been in this limbo of whether it's going to be sold or not. So I don't have a good read on it. But that money is available if we are able to use it. And then the next notable number is that 600,000 for sale of land, which we've already talked about.
I have a question.
Yes.
Is it okay to interrupt you? Okay to interrupt as you go along?
Sure.
I have a question about the LGIP reduction for 24 and 25. I know interest rates are an open question, but they're still quite a bit higher than they've been in the past, so I'm curious as to why it was reduced that much.
It's just a safety net. I mean, we've used like a
That's your
two
secret
thousand.
stash.
You know, we've used like a $2,000 holding spot for that in the past, and we've done, you know, 60,000. With things like that that are hard to predict, as much as we've looked out and, you know, we can see what the Fed is planning on doing or what the anticipations are by the Fed for interest rates. Yes, it's keep it high.
Yeah.
But in terms of revenue of this amount, I mean, I think it's okay if we come in, you know, 2 times that, you know, if we're around 100,000. It's really just a placeholder.
Okay.
And being conservative, it's good when we're over.
Yeah,
If there's an issue with that and you guys would like that bit of revenue to be shown higher, we can always make that.
no, I always like it when we under budget revenue.
Yeah.
But I'm just letting you know, so I understand. Because it does seem like, with current investments are probably moving through 2024 in the pool. Probably 2024 is gonna be probably more like 23.
Yeah, you know, if each quarter they decide to keep it at the current rate or raise it, then yeah, we should be in the end looking at a similar number, but as
Okay.
an unknown.
That's okay. Thanks.
All right, so any other questions on revenue for the conservation area fund? Great. Progress. Moving on to the expenditures. So moving down the column, you can see that the first number you really come to that 6.2 million number for ending net cash of investments in 2024. That's where we're projecting to end up at the end of 2024. You look at 2025, that goes up to 6.6 million. $6.2 to $6.6 in 2025. Our administrative costs, you can see we've slated them to go down a bit. And that's detailed elsewhere in the budget. I will just note that we are restricted to 10% of revenue for administrative costs. And so you do have a page in there which details the percentage, administrative cost percentage as revenue for 2024 and 2025. Right now, that's at basically 5.5% and then 6.3%. You can see that's going up from what we've had in previous recent years. But also remember that we don't have for 2025 any grant revenue projected because it's just too early to know whether we're going to have any grant revenue in 2025 or other revenue sources. But even so, we're well under that 10%.
I have a question. I have a question.
What, so I noticed that we went over that 10%. What happens?
Well,
Slack.
in the past, we have gone over that 10%. You can see those years were 2009, 2010, when we had a precipitous drop in real estate excise tax. So the way the commission in the past has dealt with that question is to say, really, what we're talking about is the life of the program, that we have to stay under 10% for the life of the program. And that really makes a lot of sense. If we were to draw a hard and fast line year to year, what that would mean is we probably have to make staff reductions in order to accommodate that. And then, of course, the next year or two, we'd go back up and we could hire someone else. It's just would make, operating the land bank quite difficult if we had to have those staff fluctuate.
Yeah, that's helpful.
Clearly, if we were in a trajectory or pattern where it was unsustainable, we would have to look at doing that. But that was what we considered a clear emergency and short-term situation.
Good solution.
Quick question on, there was a large jump from 22 to 23 in admin and then a projected, drop of more than 10%. Just curious as to, in general terms, what that represents.
So that is specifically for professional services that come out of admin for the strategic plan.
Okay,
Was a significant bump. So we budgeted 130,000 for professional services in the conservation area fund, and that reflects surveys, the additional survey costs that we're considering in the strategic plan. Those aren't plans that we will be taking on or plan on taking on at this point in 24 and 25.
so they're just non-regular.
Yeah, so those were not staffing volumes and
No.
wages. Yeah, no.
That wasn't my question.
Yeah. Well, that's where, that's what falls under, big portion of those administration costs. But I would note to reflect that, these administration costs, admin, staffing levels, those have all been adjusted in here based on the new collective bargaining agreement and changes.
Got it. Thank you.
All right, continuing with expenditures in the conservation area fund. Moving down below administration, the next thing is transfers to the stewardship endowment, which is set at 500,000. So we'll continue to make those payments annually into the stewardship endowment fund. And then below that is the transfer to stewardship for operations. So management, maintenance, capital projects. So that is that 2.3 number. And I just want people to be aware that's clearly a significant number for us to be putting into stewardship, and that reflects some of our ongoing larger capital costs, principally as we work toward getting properties open to the public. I don't anticipate that number being a status quo going forward. That number is going to fluctuate based on what we have going on. Okay, going down to acquisition costs, we've got that 200,000 for Hauschka Katy Mountain. The other category there is really a more professional service acquisition, appraisals, things along those lines. So it's just costs you incur when you're looking at doing purchases or sales.
Maryland.
Lincoln, what's the term on the Katy Mountain payment? How many more years do we have on that? Or,
It will end in 2025.
oh, that's right. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and one thing that's not reflected there is that there is a 5% interest charge.
It's reflected in debt services.
All right, so our debt service, you can see those numbers. That million remains constant. That will go through
2025 as well.
2025, yes, and then in 2026, we'll be retiring most of our debt. The one piece of debt that will be remaining is the bond that we took out against conservation futures revenues. That will continue until 2036. That was done when the purchase of Turtleback Mountain was. But all the other debt that we've had, all the other bonding that we've done, will come to a close at the end of 2026 when the authorization period of the REIT ends.
2036, is that the date you said for retirement of that fund?
Of the, bonding
Back.
against the conservation futures revenue. So the amount we're paying on that now. Aaron, I can't remember exactly what we're paying.
It's around 280,000 a year.
And so we do make more revenue than that, from conservation futures. And so that, the remainder is something that we put into our budget. Okay. That's what I've got on the conservation area fund. Any other questions on that one? Great. So stewardship and management fund. Within the stewardship and management fund, you can see we've basically got two different funds going, the operating and the endowment. And you can see where we are with beginning cash with those at the top of the table on the right-hand side under the 2024 column. So we're projecting to go into 2024 with 1.6 million in operating funds available in stewardship and 4.3 for the endowment funds.
And the endowment is what's held by the trust, is that right?
No, that's not correct.
Okay.
These, we are not, we're not showing anything on our budget sheets with regard to the stewardship funds that are held by the Preservation Trust for Turtleback or Mount Grant. Those are separate. And we can talk about those if you want, probably not at this, not during this conversation, but there's a significant amount of money in both of those funds. We are able to draw off of those, but we're not showing it in our budget.
So this endowment is, maybe you could explain that a little bit.
Yeah, so we have what we call an endowment for stewardship, which is basically money we have been setting aside to cover the eventuality of the REIT not being reauthorized. The reason I hesitate to call it an endowment is because our investment options are so limited. It's not what you would consider an endowment in terms of the portfolio you might hold for investments for an endowment. Typically, we're going to make much less interest income than an ordinary endowment fund. One of the issues that we've had over time, there had been an assumption that at some point we would amass enough revenue that we could cover stewardship costs out of the revenue from that endowment fund going forward in perpetuity. That is absolutely never going to happen. We don't get enough revenue from that fund to cover inflation. So it's just a reality that we have to confront. Okay, moving down in revenue. I think not going to go through some of these smaller numbers. If you have questions, let me know, but I'm going to hop down to the $1 million number under non-revenue revenues.
Yeah, that's what they call it.
Right, so
That's what the county calls it.
this is a payment of back from the conservation area fund. And this is the loan that we made from the stewardship endowment fund to the conservation area fund for the North Shore purchase. So this is that 24 is the second payment back of that loan, and 2025 will be the third and last payment. We don't have any interest. Do we have
Interest is a revenue under miscellaneous revenues. It's the second line down on miscellaneous revenues, the section above. And I think the reason, interfund is a non-revenue is because that wasn't generated revenue, it was interfund loan, so it's just moving money around. And back into it, but, the second line item under miscellaneous revenues is the interest from that one.
All right, so other revenues moving down, the 500,000, that was, as we mentioned, in the conservation area fund that's paid into stewardship, and then the transfers in for site enhancement and management and maintenance at that 2.3 million. That's increasing to 2.5 in 2025. I think all that's pretty straightforward. So questions?
Just a quick question. We have a Puget Sound grant, RCO, $140,000 for.
That is the Judd Cove Shoreline Restoration Grant project. And that is set, it has been strung along for a few years. The work is intended to be done this year, it's the last year. Grant.
24.
24,
Okay, so moving down to expenditures. And that first line there, the ending operating cash. And then ending endowment funds is the second line. And what we're projecting the total of that to be at the end of 2024 is 7.5 million. And then at the end of 2025, 9 million. I'll just note that the total, if you combine that with the conservation area fund, you're looking at about 15 million that we would have at the end of 2025. Obviously, you can play that through to the end of 2026 when we hit the potential end of authorization, see how much cash we might have on hand to continue to manage properties. Take it with a grain of salt. If you decide to buy something, that number will change. Okay, so management and maintenance. We have that broken down by district. And the two big categories we have here for stewardship expenditures, management and maintenance is one. And you have breakdowns of those. Well, we've got a breakdown of the capital projects, not so much for management and maintenance projects. But those have stayed. There have been increases through those, but a lot of fluctuation also with the management and maintenance numbers. This is what we've come up with, sitting down with stewardship staff and trying to project what we think we've got going for any given year. It'll fluctuate a bit. But as you can see, what we're looking at there is for 2023, we're projecting having 846,000 in management and maintenance costs, and that's going to be reduced to 742,000 in 2024, 734,000 2025. So that's come down a bit. By contrast, if you go down to site enhancement, you can see a big jump under those numbers. And that's really largely reflective of the capital costs we expect to incur in getting preserves open for the public. So particularly in the San Juan district, there's a jump there. And then you've got the sheet of capital projects attached to that, so you can go through those and see exactly what we're talking about. If you have questions, I'm not going to run through those numbers individually. There it is. For District 2, much of that is the North Shore project, where we've got a lot infrastructure to put in before we can get that preserve open. We do have a big jump in 2024 from 2023. And then it starts to come down again in 2025. And I will stop there, see if there are any questions.
Lincoln back under management and maintenance. I didn't remember, and I guess I overlooked this because we've obviously done it, but I didn't remember that we had broken agriculture out as a separate category, and I assume that's across all three districts. I'd like to know at some point, not now, how that money is being spent and why, and maybe you can explain now why it's broken out as a separate category.
On the back page, it shows it's all Copper Farm.
Oh, I see. Okay. Maybe just answer the question.
And 2 years ago, prior to the last biennium budget, we thought, you know, when we were heavily involved in plans for Kaufeld and the public's desire to know what we were doing with agricultural properties, we felt instead of just including them into the districts, that it was for the public's benefit to see what we're doing for agricultural activities, what we're spending on our ag lands.
Understandable.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think that raises a question. You know, it's a topic that I think that we will look at in the course of our strategic planning. How much investment we're making in active agricultural support. So it's good to have that number broken out. Thank you. Thank you.
Not on the list, but something we've talked about, and I don't know how it'll get addressed, but Watmore parking. Well, we agree to, and I think that's a partnership approach, but I would love to see something done on that sooner rather than later, because it's a mess. There's people parking all over the place. I would like to see it as a limiting factor, so many people wouldn't go down there because they can't park, but it doesn't work that way. So anyway, I'd love to see that one figured out.
All right.
Okay. Any other questions for Lincoln
Good job.
or Aaron?
Go through.
So this is a public hearing now on our
Hey, Judy.
Let me say it, Judy. This is a public hearing on our 2023, 24, 25 biennial budget. And I will now open the public hearing. There are members of the public to ask questions and make comments. Judy.
Thank you, Brian. First of all, I've always been so impressed with the interest and involvement from the staff and the commission with the budgetary matters. As budget nerd myself, you know, it was heartening and it continues to be so. So I just have one brief question and one brief comment. And I'm looking at the spreadsheet for 1021 Conservation Area Fund. And on the revenue side, the 1% admin fee to the treasurer, which is a counter revenue item, because that's how the county likes to see it. I just see zeros in 2021 and 2022. I'm assuming that's been netted out. And I just wonder if it might make more sense to the public if it were broken out for those years as it is in the other years.
Yeah, I could do that. This is based off of the worksheets provided from the auditor's office, and I'm not sure why they zero those out for actuals from prior years.
Yeah, there's some history there.
It's definitely a good topic of conversation, because we do know we have to pay that 1% for the treasury handling funds. That's just what they take for their cut.
That's right. Yeah, because then you get a more accurate picture of the actual,
Right.
That was a super nerdy comment. That was great.
oh, it's not nerdy, it's.
But we wondered about that
I want
too.
to amplify.
How are you seeing it negative?
Marilyn and I are from the same part. Um, So, in regards to project descriptions, perhaps inclusion of project descriptions, specifically house shed in for 2024-25, is addressed, I think, maybe in the land bank ordinance. My dim memory is that even though the initial acquisition of a piece of property took place in a prior year, if payments are made on that property in a current budget period, I believe the ordinance addresses that those project descriptions should be included in, the packet of paper that starts with, that big title page. And I think it's because not only our public, but in the past, I know we have a different auditor now. This has been included in that big budget book, which goes out to all kinds of financing companies and other governments in the state.
Yeah, in the packet materials that does go to the council and to the auditor, does include project descriptions. Or project summaries, sorry, and
No, the summaries and the descriptions are different. The project description would be a specific description of why the property is purchased, when it was purchased, how it's gonna be paid for, and the process it went through to be approved. It's a narrative.
yeah, well, thank you for bringing that up, and we'll make sure that we come through the ordinance, make sure the proper materials are supplied.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Brian.
Okay, thank you, Judy, for that comment. Any other comments from the public? Okay.
Maybe. We stopped sharing that. Thanks, sir. I think Sandy might have been the only person who raised her hand.
Who is not a member of the public, so
Right.
we will get back to Sandy.
Understood, but you don't have anyone in the public.
All right. I will then close the public hearing on the budget. And I'm assuming at this point with the comments that have been made that we will continue this hearing at our next annual meeting. Does that work in terms of timing?
Our next
I'm
monthly
sorry,
meeting.
monthly meeting.
We can do that.
Okay.
That's wishful thinking, on the annual
Sounds
meeting.
good, yeah, I know. Sandy, did you have yes, your hand is up, please. Go ahead, Sandy.
Yes, I was waiting for. So I have two, they're not specific questions about the budget. They are more general comments, questions about the whole package. So I wanted to save them till the end. So on the table of contents page, if you could go to table of contents, and there's the paragraph in the smaller font down below. So the second sentence says changes to amounts on this document may be made by the auditor's office and may be presented at the public hearing for the San Juan County budget. And so my question on that is that accurate? Is that the right? Should that statement be on there? I thought we went through this last year that the auditor couldn't make changes to the numbers on our budget.
Yes, that statement is accurate, and that's in reference to payroll, insurance, there's IT costs. Some of those get adjusted throughout the remainder of this year, and those are the items that they are able to change in the budget.
So
I think it would, I think Sandy, I definitely, yes, I was looking at that myself and had some big questions about it, and I think it may be that we need to come up with some verbiage, kind of limiting that to, those particular items where, there's a change in insurance costs or whatever it is. It's typically gonna be a pretty minor piece of the budget, and it's not going to be project related or, decisions about, allocations of, major allocations of money, but there could be those adjustments made. They need to have the ability to do that because it shifts a bit as they work their way through the budget process.
So maybe what we could do is just change that one line using the verbiage from the ordinance and citing that part of the ordinance that limits changing of line items, and then put that as an exception. I just think it's not a bad idea to have it on this cover page as a reminder. If we're going to mention it at all, it should be more accurate. And then going along with, and I don't know that this is part of the ordinance, going back to Judy's comment about either project descriptions or summaries, I don't remember, being required to be included in this package. What about a description on the sale of property? It feels like it's, that's a pretty big thing. I know that someone looking at this might need to understand a little more about properties being sold, or no?
That's, so the premise for reselling property goes back to the original project description or project summary. Now I don't know what the difference is, but I think of the project summary as the original narrative that goes with the budget, explaining why we're purchasing the property and if there are any other elements that are pertinent. One of those always is whether or not the commission is reserving the right to resell property. So you'll find that in those original project proposals, summaries. I think when we get to the point of actually reselling a property, what we have here are, budget numbers, not necessarily accurate. Some of them maybe more so, that we've had a previous appraisal on a property and we've got an idea of what the number might be. But they're not final numbers. And so that's going to have to come back to the commission, and we're going to have a discussion about it. So it's abundantly clear to the public exactly what's going on at that point in time. And then the procedure for resale of property is that it goes to the county council once the commission has signed off on it. It goes to the council for their decision about what type of sale it's going to be. They can decide it should be an auction, or they can decide it's going to be a direct sale. They'll want evidence in the form of an appraisal, generally, that we're getting over appraised value for that resale. But then they'll make that decision, and pretty sure there's a public hearing associated with that process also. So there will be ample opportunities for people to really look at the specifics of these resale projects.
Okay, thank you. One last thing on the page that summarizes the fee simple acquisitions and conservation easements across the various districts. And it's referring to acreage. And it just seems I think it's great to include that, but as part of a budget package, since part of our ordinance states that the commission should try to balance acquisitions across the districts based on revenue, REIT revenue, would it be, is this the place to show that instead of acreage to be showing expenditures? Doesn't need to be answered here. I know that, and I'm not trying to create a lot of work. It's just a notation, since it's a budget projection. The idea of just showing acreage seemed a little odd. Just a comment. That's all.
Okay, Sandy, thank you for your comments and questions, particularly in reading the fine print on the table of contents. I think that that's a very good comment on the potential changes to the document, given our recent experience. And I think it's probably, I understand this is a disclaimer, but it's probably worth reining that language in a little better, defining it a little more closely. So thanks. Sandy's comment and Judy's comment, first of all, put me in mind of another question, or actually a question in the comment. First of all, on the fee acquisition summary list, I just think that that's a very useful list, both for commissioners and for the public. I personally have the information on the costs of those acquisitions. I think that might be useful for the commissioner. For the public, I don't know, as part of the budget document, but anyway, I think that this list is really good as public information. I'm glad it's included. Second thing, back to Judy's comments on capital projects. I realized I highlighted one question that I have, which is in District 2. I noticed that the interpretive signage on the North Shore property is likely covered by San Juan Preservation Trust. I didn't know that. And why is that?
That's because in the grants that they have secured, they're committed to certain expenditures in addition to the acquisition costs. So demolition was one of them, signage was another one. These granting programs typically require you to put up some signage, giving them credit for giving you the money. So we'll work through all of that.
Yeah, good. Well, I want to make sure that the land bank gets credit too, and that's been something of an issue in the past. I would expect that interpretive signage on that property is going to be a big deal. There's a lot to interpret, and it'll be very interesting to interpret for the public. So I hope that we will actually work jointly on that.
Certainly.
Okay, great. That's all I have. Any last comments, questions from commissioners? Okay, thank you. We'll wrap up the budget until our next monthly meeting. And we're just about on time for the director's report.
Right, so I'm going to pretty much immediately turn this over to Bree. Bree Chartier is the National Monument Manager for the BLM. And we wanted her to come to talk about the Watanow Addition property and BLM's position on it, what their hopes are, and give you all a good understanding of where the agency is coming from on it. Following that, we'll have the additional public comment period, and I'm pretty sure we'll have some comments coming online. So, okay, Bree, do you have a PowerPoint, or you just?
I wasn't sure if I would have the ability to show one, so I didn't bring one. But I made one for me to look at, and if anybody wants to look at it later, you're welcome to. I think I should probably introduce myself first. I am Bree Chartier. I have been in this job for about a year. But I've been involved in, land management of some sort for pretty much my entire adult life. Even before college, I was involved in local youth corps, which is where I got my first experience in public service, in land management, public service. From there, I went to the Park Service and worked as an interpreter. And then after that, I had a long career as a law enforcement officer where I both enforced resource protection laws on the ground and prosecuted for the federal government in multiple jurisdictions for 4 different agencies. After that, I went into planning and I was an outdoor recreation planner in California. And then after that, I started working for the National Conservation Land System, doing details to the state office in California and Colorado. Then I came here. And so that's a little bit about my background, and I'm sure definitely impacts the way I see things. And so let's talk about the monument and this potential acquisition of the Whatmau area. So I think first of all, I attended the public meeting on Lopez, and I heard a lot of concerns there that I think reflect a need to go back and talk about the management plan a little bit, what we actually ended up with in our final approved resource management plan. And so that's where I want to start before we get into the Whatmau acquisition. Is just in general, how is the monument managing its lands? As you know, the process was lengthy. And it occurred at kind of a rough time politically, and there was a lot of uncertainty in how this would all play out and end out. And I know that, initially when the land bank was thinking about this Whatmau acquisition, the plan was to partner with the BLM to help to cover or offset those acquisition costs. But because of the uncertainty that arose during the management plan, that was put on hold because it was clear that the potential decisions that would end up in the final management plan might not mesh with the goals of the land bank and the desires of the community. But what ended up happening with the RMP, the resource management plan, is that it was modified. And it was modified to reflect concerns raised by the governor's office in the governor's consistency review, and by consulting tribes, and the Monument Advisory Committee, which is made up of a cross-section of local residents and tribal members and members of the public. And so what actually ended up in that final plan? So in the proposed resource management plan, pretty much the entire island, the entire monument was open for recreational use. And was part of what we call RMAs, or recreation management areas. In the approved resource management plan, the community had asked us to set aside certain lands for conservation only and to not allow recreation. And so we removed the small BLM administered rocks from inclusion in an RMA, a recreation management area, and we're planning on restricting public access to those rocks to authorize scientific, educational, and cultural uses. So the second modification was, I think, the biggest concern, from what I understand that the community had was camping and how camping was going to be managed. And I don't even know if we communicated well the original plan, never mind what we ended up with. So let's talk about both. So in the proposed plan, 274 acres of the monument would have been available to disperse camping by permit. That's I don't know of any other place where that happens, so that's a kind of an interesting solution to managing use. I think what it might have functionally ended up with was maybe no permits, but, I think it was better what they ended up with, and this was, I think, due to the advocacy of the local community. And, the BLM, did respond to that, and, so in the approved RMP, we continue to provide overnight camping at 3 places. That's Blind, Posey, and Paydos Island, where the state park has been managing camping there for some time in designated sites. But dispersed camping in the entire monument is prohibited. So those were the 2 big changes that happened in the final RMP, and then there was also some editorial changes that clarified the intent of firearms and shooting restrictions in the monument. So the entire national monument is closed to any kind of recreational shooting except for hunting. And there's only certain areas of the monument that are open to hunting. We are not required to, nor do we allow hunting at all of our locations, very similar to the land banks management of hunting. So that is kind of what we ended up in the RMP. The RMP itself provides a framework that supports the presidential proclamation that created the monument, which is all about conservation. You know, this is a national monument with a focus on conservation and science that allows recreation rather than the other way around. And so we are going to manage it as such moving forward. So thinking about the issue at hand, the Watmau acquisition, and what's going to happen to it long term. My frame of reference here is what's going to be best for what I want to see happen is what's best for maximizing our ability to conserve what we have and acquire new conservation lands in the long term. And so when I started thinking about this, that's where my mind went. And then after the public meeting on Lopez, which was extremely helpful, that kind of helped crystallize things for me. And I think it really made me realize that we need to talk about what would happen with this acquisition, not just for this acquisition, because it potentially affects our entire strategy about acquisition of new public lands moving forward, which the land bank plays a major role in. So we'll get to that more in a minute, but I did kind of a maximum benefit and risk analysis for the acquisition of this Watmau area. And thinking about the benefit to the land, how we could serve our goal of conservation, stewardship, and protection, respectively, depending on who managed it, and you know, how that would serve the local interest. So the first issue that was raised was cabin preservation. And in my risk analysis, I put 3 big question marks and a minus for both our organizations. Because I think, well, the preservation of the cabin fits well into both of our missions. We share similar limitations due to resources, and the condition of the cabin and the cultural ground it sits on, which all create a very complex scenario. So definitely more consideration is needed on this topic, and I think you know, we're really behind the curve on having a good sustainable plan moving forward. The BLM and the land bank both have had experts look at this property, and every one of them has seen immediate and major challenges that would have to be addressed, including presence of lead paint, outdated electrical system that in itself can create a risk to the structure, unstable perch. It's basically sitting on the surface on a variety of interesting support mechanisms, including when I peeked under there, some what looked like very old cedar shingles that have been used to shim up corners of the property and help keep the building stable. So that's obviously, kind of on a timeline, and, it would be better to remediate quickly. You know, this is all occurring on top of a major cultural resource, you know, a shell maiden. This, you know, the setting in itself, the cabin is in a setting that reflects, you know, between 11 and 14,000 years of continuous use. So, I think it's a big question mark, you know, as to how we can manage the cabin. And I think, we all recognize that it, plays, an important role in representing the history of you know, early European settlement here, and, the history of Lopez Island from its very beginning to modern times. You know, personally, I think that cabin, that structure is very significant. And I know that, the Lopez community agrees with that, and then the historical community agrees with that. I don't think it's something that is in question by any of our experts in either agency. I'm gonna leave it there because, like I said, 3 big question marks, about moving forward on that issue. But let's move on to the next issue, which is hunting. This was raised by a few folks at the meeting on Lopez. And so while both the land bank and the BLM allow hunting on some lands, I don't think either of us consider it appropriate activity for this particular Guatemala addition. I think that would be due to its small size, its juxtaposition to multiple residences, potential planned uses, and there's a lot of other factors too. So what can we do? Do we need to allow hunting? No. The BLM has rulemaking authority similar to the land bank, and enforcement of restrictions in San Juan County would utilize the same strategy regardless of who managed it, which would be relying on the sheriff to trespass violators. Of course, hunting enforcement that is done by the state is done on lands regardless. So enforcement would look the same. I think outreach would look the same. The BLM could additionally create an enforceable supplemental rule. So the BLM, unlike most landowners, we can actually kind of pass laws and make them, you know, part of our Code of Federal Regulations. They could be enforced in federal court if needed. So this could be another management tool that could be brought to bear. The BLM has systems in place to allow exercise of tribal treaty rights, even if hunting is restricted to the general public. And so I think that would be the intent, also assuming of the land bank as well. You know, tribal treaty rights need to be protected, and activities that have been occurring for 14,000 years would continue, hopefully. There's other challenges, of course, by the massive development we've seen regionally. And I mean, that's a whole other issue, but the bottom line here, I think, is that we want to support the same vision when it comes to hunting moving forward on this particular piece of property. The next issue is camping. And I heard some concern from the local community that there would be camping allowed here. And I think this goes back to the BLM's maybe need to explain more to the public what ended up in the final resource management plan and how we're going to move forward in managing the land. So we covered that there's no dispersed camping. And I don't think the BLM or the land bank would manage developed camping at the Guatemala position. You know, both would restrict camping probably to administrative use, such as the use of the land for tribal treaty rights and canoe journeys, and potentially to support conservation corps and other volunteer or you know, sanctioned uses, or sanctioned groups who are here for assisting or helping in our conservation mission. Such as, the American Hiking Society Volunteer Vacation, which the BLM has been supporting for the last few years, and the Washington Conservation Corps, which has been doing work for the land bank, and the Youth Conservation Corps, which has been helping stewardship activities on both of the lands. And so, I think we would probably envision trying to support that activity, and it seems like the Whatnot acquisition would be a great place to do it, because it does have electricity, it does have water, it has flat ground, without forest or sand, which I think is rare in all of our properties, that we have these resources that we potentially use. But I do want to say this, the final plan on how that would look, in the BLM at least, would be determined after an environmental analysis. That included public participation and support from BLM experts, which, we have basically when we do these environmental analyses, we have cultural experts, biologists, ecologists, engineers, recreation specialists, law enforcement specialists, and we all sit down together and we brainstorm potential issues. That's how that process starts. And then here with the monument, it's kind of cool because we also have this additional tool, the Monument Advisory Committee, that we can bring in very early in the process and start briefing and having conversations with, and they can be acting as our conduit between the public and the BLM in both directions. We'll get back to just a couple more points on that process and how it played out both in the management plan and how it would be utilized in the future in just a second. Overuse was another issue that was brought up. And I think this is a concern of all land managers everywhere. If you look at Outdoor Industry Association national statistics, recreation use is up 12% this year. But I think what's really interesting in that is that it's down for repeat visits from individuals, which I think is something that I saw reflected at that community meeting. It's where we heard folks say, I don't go there anymore because it's just too crowded.
That's Watmore Bay.
Watmore Bay, yeah.
Yeah.
And this is something we hear about places a lot everywhere. Like I know myself, I've experienced this a lot in my recreation choices, places that I used to go, I can no longer get to or wouldn't want to because the experience is so different and it's not what I'm looking for. So the management plan does talk about this, and it says what we're going to do to manage the recreation experience at certain locations. And I think that's a little bit too much to get into at this meeting, but we do have a plan. So I do want to say that. So I also want to say use is complex. It's determined by supply and demand. It's not determined by the agency's landowner. So the public is going to want to go someplace because it's beautiful and Instagrammable and has warm water and beaches and short walks from the car and it's free. Like that's the things that folks, in juxtaposition to what they're doing otherwise. Which, on the case of, we'll say at Watmouth Beach, people aren't coming there to go to Watmouth Beach, they're coming there to go to Lopez, and then Watmouth Beach is there, and it's a really nice beach. And also, one of the few publicly accessible beaches that we have here in Sunland County. So that creates a high demand. It's a very small area. The parking lot is very small, so we have a supply issue. And that is just the setting and the demographics and the global economy, that is driving these things. I think, we're trying to understand more about our use on our lands. And when I say our, I'm talking about the land bank, the BLM, all the other public land managers here in the island. And I think what we've realized is that we don't really have good, reliable, long-term ways to track trends and get statistics on who's using certain places and when. The BLM does have trail counters out, and I'm not sure if other agencies are using these as well, but we are getting some idea of our use at certain locations, and it's something that I've been putting a lot of energy into, because when I make decisions, I want good data. And so the first thing I've been trying to do since I got here, and since the management plan was passed in January, is get good data. And so that's the very first step in our planning process, is knowing our problems, knowing our issues. And we're definitely seeing a lot of use at certain places like Watermount Beach. But our most visited area is Cattle Point. So access to the parcel that we're talking about today, the Whatnot addition. So this would share infrastructure on BLM land for trailheads. There's no other option there. And so this would add to the stress of the parking lot issue, regardless of who manages it, when it is open to the public. The trail that is that I saw that's proposed under the land banks plan to open it to the public is exactly what the BLM would do. So public access would look the same regardless of who managed it, and we'd be facing the same challenge. I think the land bank's public access plan is sound, and it's gonna create challenges for both of our agencies that we're gonna have to work closely together to figure out. First and foremost is the trailhead, is the gateway. And there's not any great options. There's certainly things we can consider, and there's a lot of things we can consider there. But it's gonna take a while, because the first thing we wanna do in the National Monument is do a cultural resource management plan. So we're working with the tribal forum to work on that and figure out how we can have effective co-stewardship with the tribes, so that when we make these decisions, we're using all of the regional knowledge, including our modern scientific knowledge and traditional stewardship knowledge that has been passed down and acquired for 14,000 years. So I apologize if this is going too long. Let me try to speed this up a little bit. So the next issue that I heard mentioned just a couple of times, was what do the tribes think? What do the tribes want here? And I think it's something that we all think and we all recognize is important. So let's look at this as tribal co-stewardship. So co-stewardship is co-managing the landscape in a functional way. And I think federal agencies are still trying to figure out exactly what that means. But we have functional models, including strong co-stewardship agreements that are in place at this point in history in the Bureau of Land Management. We also have established formal government-to-government relationships with all the Coast Salish tribes. They were very involved in our resource management plan, and will continue to be involved in any environmental assessment or environmental impact statement or planning process that we have moving forward. That is in place. We inform the tribes every time we do something. And that is actually no different than would be this process. So this process that we're talking about, if the BLM were to acquire the Whatnot acquisition, we would do an environmental assessment. And that would involve formal government-to-government consultation with tribes. So we get to hear from them that that system is in place. We have some extra tools here that are kind of very new and unique to land management overall, and that is our tribal forum. The tribal forum is still being developed, Right now, we have a quarterly meeting with the tribes, to try to figure out how we're going to structure that. And the BLM is also, has in place a $100,000 grant with a consultant this year to work with the tribes, because these are all individual sovereign nations, and so, they want to have conversations with each other, and having a third party neutral there to facilitate those conversations is going to help this process. Then what we hope is that they will come to us with how they want the tribal forum to be structured. And of course, we'll be involved in that process as advisors and however the tribe wants us to be involved in that. So that'll be working towards a functional co-stewardship agreement with the tribe, which would, I think, play very strongly into the management of the Whatnot addition moving forward. And could potentially support the addition even if the BLM did not acquire it, but it would be much simpler if the BLM was the steward of this land for a true functional tribal stewardship agreement to be in place that had specific outlines of what tribes want and how they want to manage lands like Whatnot addition. Local control of management decisions. And so this is something that I put yes to both of our agencies. But I definitely put a couple more pluses there on the land bank side. I think the land bank has major advantages here. But the BLM has a process, and we do that process does prioritize local input in planning. I want to say that I think like one of the land bank's strength is that it's nimble and can respond to new developments fairly quickly. And I believe it seems to be in my mind that this could be a business decision that supports this partnership, hopefully, for this property and in the future for the land bank to recover acquisition costs. Because if we can create a reliable pipeline for that, I think that would help the land bank being able to move quickly when new conservation, what's the word? Don't you hate it when a word just won't come to your head? It's like the simplest word that you learned in the second grade. Opportunities present themselves. Okay, so let's talk about how local control looks with the Bureau of Land Management. And I think we can look to the RMP process to see kind of how that did play out there. And the RMP, the Resource Management Plan for the San Juan Island National Monument that has now been approved, included multiple phases. There was a notice of intent and then 5 public meetings, local public meetings were held for that, and a monument advisory committee meeting. There was also 4 workshops and a lengthy open written comment period through the winter and spring of 2016. When the draft was released, there was a 3-month open comment period, 5 public meetings, and 8 individual discussion opportunities where BLM staff went to local libraries to be available to the public to answer questions on the process. The last phase was a 30-day public protest period on the proposed RMP and a 60-day government consistency review. Concurrently, there was a 60-day public comment period regarding the proposal to prohibit shooting except for hunting in the monument. And the substantive changes within the scope of the resource management plan that were raised by the governor's consistency review and were also addressed by comments received from the public during our public comment periods and processes here resulted in changes to the final resource management plan that I mentioned above. And it's my understanding that these were made to address concerns of the residents and the local agencies. I hope we did well on that, but recognizing that there's always room for improvement, I think, we have a lot of great assets here, including the terrestrial managers group that the BLM was instrumental in helping to develop. Which I think is relied on heavily by all the land managers in the San Juan Islands and allows us to work effectively together. And I think this is a very strong form of local control. You know, myself as the National Monument Manager am part of a close-knit cadre of local public land managers. And I'm getting all of my knowledge and advice and expertise from an amazing resource that I'm so grateful to have, because I think very few public land managers in the rest of the US have something as amazing as this to support, you know, the mission. Okay, local partnerships. I've got just two more. Thank you so much to everyone. The BLM was instrumental in helping to start the Terrestrial Managers Group and Leave No Trace in San Juan Islands, and remains committed to strengthening the relationships that we've developed in the past. We also have the ability to do contracts and develop grants. Fiscal year 2024, so that's this year, the BLM will give over $200,000 in grants to the local community to support work in developing the capacity and skills of local organizations to help us fulfill our mandate. So we are trying to give resources to empower local knowledge that we can then use to further our conservation and restoration goals in mind. Recipients include the Coast Salish Youth Corps, Quiat, and as I mentioned, you know, a consultant to work with all of our local Coast Salish tribes for our local tribal forum. And the consultant is actually at Bellingham. So this is, I hope, what is the start. We hope to develop these in the future. We have a couple of other longstanding grants that we do, and I'm hoping to work more with contracting, you know, you know, if we're gonna make infrastructure improvements, we're gonna have to work together as a local community and figure out how we can, you know, internally support, the, you know, needs that we have, in engineering and site improvement. Okay, so we're getting to the end here. Let's talk about long-term management. Because I think really that's where we're headed, right? That's what we want. So the land bank has been executing their mission for 30 years and has actively managed, actively managed 5,000 acres of land. That is remarkable. You know, the land bank does a superb job on that. I want to point out that the BLM has the same long-term mission of preservation and restoration. Now, if you look at our mission statements and what we have, especially here specific to our national monument, they're just different words that say the same thing. We share the same long-term vision and goals to restore healthy ecosystems using the breadth of traditional ecological knowledge held by the Coast Salish tribes, and continuing local scientific research leading to advancements in understanding of the local ecology and how to manage and restore it and make it climate resilient. The BLM is a great partner to work seamlessly with the land bank to fulfill our collective mission, and that's not going to change regardless. You know, I did want to say that the land bank is nimble, as I mentioned, well positioned to respond to new acquisition opportunities, but they need to have the resources to do that. And through this model of BLM selling land, or I'm purchasing land from the land bank, this is what I see as the most effective and realistic way for our agency to support the local desire for conservation lands and the need. You know, as a resident who has a 6-year-old child, it's something I desperately want personally as well. So we can't purchase lands from the public. It's hard. We usually miss the opportunity. Our process is long and demanding and requires a lot of steps. We are not nimble. But we can manage effectively in the long term. So I think it takes both of us in order to really realize this, long-term vision that we both share, both of our agencies share, and is reflected, you know, in the fact that I'm here managing a national monument at all, is the will of the people here. Okay, so that's pretty much what I've been thinking about over the last few days. You know, going back to our mission, which is basically preservation, restoration, equity. I think, you know, it really comes down to that. You know, the BLM, I think, is a great partner to have in lands conservation. We have the National Conservation Land System, which the National Monument is a part of. We have been managing conservation lands for 117 years since the Antiquities Act of 1906. You know, the BLM itself manages 37 million acres of conservation lands, over 905 segregate conservation units. So I have a huge support network of career experts that have dealt with every conceivable problem that I can reach out to. And even if I'm portable, you know, the person who comes in next to me is going to be great. You know, and we're hiring great staff. You know, we just hired an expert interpreter who's bringing a lot of enthusiasm and amazing skills. You know, Owen Ellis, who's actually here today supporting me and learning more about, you know, our local issues. And so, yeah, so that's what I have for you all. I'm happy to take questions or yield the floor.
Thank you, Bree. Okay, commissioners, what I'd like to propose to you is that, first of all, give you an opportunity to ask Bree any questions. I'd like to postpone a lot of back and forth discussion till a little bit later in the meeting. But if you have any questions for Bree, let's ask them now. Then I'd like to open it for additional comment from our public. If there's anybody who is listening that wants to comment. And then finally, I'd like to have additional discussion among the commission. At some point, we're scheduled for break now. So does anybody, well, let's ask Bree any questions we have now, and then how do you feel? Do you want to take a 5-minute break, or shall we just roll through? Anybody?
Let's roll.
Let's roll. Okay, public discussion later. First, questions from any commissioners for Bree.
So one of the things that we've been hearing was that cabin had to be removed. If BLM was gonna buy it, and it sounds like you're shifting, you know, your perspective on that.
Okay, so here's where I might put my foot in my mouth. Because you know, after listening to that meeting and after, you know, talking to members of the community, you know, including Amy at the Historical Society there, it was just obvious to me that, you know, we need to make every effort to look at some way, you know, to honor the cabin, the history it represents, and the you know, the wholeness of the historic setting there. And so this is a problem that we're still gonna have to work on. But I'm hoping that we might be able to find, you know, another solution.
So still to be, you don't know the final answer on that one. That's fine.
I
That's fine.
don't right now, or I can't promise anything right now. You know, and it's the hardest thing for me because you know, that I understand that this is such a major issue, but I'm just not sure, like, I'm any more confident regardless of manager of the fate of the cabin. And certainly if it was a requirement that the, you know, that it was somehow removed or mitigated before we purchased it, then obviously that's very easy for you all to respond to. But if not, it almost becomes more muddy because I think really it comes down to not only the passion, but the active advocacy of the community if this, you know, if this cabin's gonna be saved.
Okay.
Well, I have
Other
another
que-
question, but
go
this
ahead.
might be a longer conversation is, collaborative opportunities. There was so much sentiment about the land bank continue to be the owner. And yet the BLM has resources that you could bring to the table. You have relationships with some of the tribes. We're developing those relationships. Is there an opportunity for somehow a collaborative approach to this? Maybe the land bank owns it, the BLM takes on some element of helping to support those relations. This is kind of a bigger question that I don't even really know how it would work. Are there examples of that kind of collaborative approach?
I think the most relevant, at least to the Coast Salish tribes, you know, would be the co-stewardship agreements that are in place in like Bears Ears. So we have good models there, and we're actually going to be having some discussions about it internally in the next couple of weeks. So to really get more familiar with how that process is working. I've thought a lot about, you know, can we lease it? Can we purchase and lease lands? You know, like either just around the cabin to a nonprofit or a historical group to, you know, allow for management. Can we somehow acquire conservation easements? Can we, you know, have shared interests in properties? And I think in most of those cases, regrettably, we've painted ourselves into a bit of a corner. So like a recreation and public purposes lease is very common on BLM lands, except it can't be done in national monuments from what I'm understanding. Although I still need to talk to my realty folks and brainstorm this a little more. I'm thinking that beyond what we already do in sharing knowledge and resources and collaborating on our decisions, I'm not sure like a formal financial arrangement besides whole ownership would work or be allowed by law. I'm just not sure. But I do know that we do hold a conservation easement on lands around Watmau Bay. You know, there are inspections by you know, that make sure that we are in compliance with that conservation easement. And so that's kind of picking at my brain, wondering if, you know, there might be some opportunity there to really guarantee that local stakeholdership.
So the land bank owns the easement,
Correct.
right? So that was the collective we. I like that.
Yep.
So maybe this is a longer, more detailed conversation, but I'm just curious because I like what I'm hearing about what you're doing, and I think we're hearing this from the tribes too, that, you know, your relationship building there is good. But I don't know, anyway. I don't think this is the place to have a longer conversation, but at some point, I think we really need it.
Well, continued discussion. Other commissioners.
I have a question. You referred to the required environmental analysis. It sounds like that's sort of after the fact. I mean, you made it, if I'm hearing things wrong, it made it sound like that could always change whatever we agree to. If we were to agree to something with the cabin, for example, that's done presumably before the environmental analysis. The environmental analysis comes in later and requires something different. Am I reading that wrong, or why is the environmental analysis something that you caution us with respect to camping?
Well, I think because, so by law, we're required to have public processes in our decisions. And so this wouldn't exactly count as that. And so when we did those public processes and did the EA, is actually, it would be another thing that we would partner with and would be strategized for maximum benefit. So if I say like, hey, I want to put in I want to improve the water line, or I want to, to support Coast Salish Youth Corps activity there. I can't just do it. I have to ask the community what they think. In terms of an environmental assessment, which I think would be required for this acquisition, and probably creating a management plan for it. It would be pre-decisional for me to say, this is what we're gonna do. I can say, well, this is what I wanna do, and this is what I see as a vision. Yeah, without that public process, I think we know what the community wants here, though. So, but I don't want to say, yes, this is exactly what we're gonna do. But in terms of like restoring the cabin or not, I think that's more of a resource issue. We could certainly make sure that we are far along enough in our environmental assessment as quickly as possible so that we know what the plan would be moving forward. And I think we would take what the land bank has done and run with it, because they've done a wonderful job and we don't want to reinvent the wheel. We don't have to.
I have another question. I'd like to understand your perspective on the community. Sounded like they'd had some bad experiences with BLM. In fact, I think that's the biggest emotional issue that drives their opinion of what we should do. I'm new to this, kind of thing. And you, from your perspective, and I know you've only been doing this for a year, can you give us your opinion of why the community has this opinion of BLM, and why they should ultimately believe that that'll not happen again, whatever that was?
Yeah, this is actually something I've been reflecting on a lot, especially in terms of just this decision in itself, reflecting the will of the community. I'm here advocating for what I think would be best for the conservation and preservation of the landscape overall, recognizing that it is at odds with what the community stood up and spoke at that meeting. But what I'm hoping is that through these conversations today, that folks will have a better idea of what we are, how we are managing going forward. And it seemed to me that reflected in those emotions was part of that process that took 10 years. It took way too long. And it was very frustrating, I think, for folks to move at that, and there was just so much insecurity and bad communication from the BLM on what the plan was. But I think there's also some other issues here that play into this, which is those, I think those economic issues, supply and demand issues. The BLM has a very complex mission nationwide, which is a lot more than conservation lands. We're in the news a lot. We have a complex relationship with both, our political government and the people we serve, because our mandate is so huge. I feel insulated from that a lot here because, our local mandate is very clear. And there's no risk that we're gonna have these other issues like, energy development or, anything like that, because one, those resources don't exist here, and two, the presidential proclamation that created the monument prevents it, and we only have monument lands here, which is not normal. Normally, there's monument lands, and then next to it might be, you know, lands that are open to oil and gas lease, or monument lands that are grazed and used for multiple uses like that. And I think that's very, you know, very controversial and very emotional. But I think it also comes down to just poor communication, which we need to improve upon drastically. And I feel very, very hopeful about that, because we've hired an interpreter who has a lot of experience talking to the public, and will help us create a strategy going forward. And I think this year we've tried to make strides in that with both our local park ranger, who was working on Lopez all summer, which I have every confidence will continue. And is actually one of the reasons that I'm kind of interested in this acquisition, is to provide some stable, secure, affordable housing opportunities for my summer seasonal, and kind of maybe, you know, act also as an on-site presence and store to help protect the landscape there. Again, I can't say that's exactly what'll happen, because we have to go through a public process and talk to the community about it. That's what I'd like to see there. Anyway, hopefully we'll be seeing more, we'll be getting uniforms, and we'll be getting out to public events, and we'll be holding regular office hours on all the islands. We're thinking about a book club, just a way for people to gather and discuss these issues on a more regular basis. You know, and the BLM monument was unstaffed for a bit there, and I don't think that helped our case much. And we've been building back our not only locally, but our entire agency after you know, the recent political turmoil. But I feel very good about the direction we're going, especially here. I know I'm heavily invested. I'm not going anywhere anytime soon. I'm still painting the house I bought, so you know, and I really believe in this cause. Like, I came here for this opportunity to manage this landscape, because I recognized when I first heard it was a monument 10 years ago, how special it was. And I kind of had my eye on it ever since. And I was blown away when they offered me this job. I never expected I would actually be able to come here and do it. And I feel a lot of responsibility towards both our mission and serving the public here. And it's to the point where sometimes I get overwhelmed, and I find myself in tears. Because
Bree,
it's a big responsibility.
excuse me. We all appreciate your statement. I'm recognizing
sorry.
that there are a couple of members of the public here, and I want to get to everybody.
Sure.
Before we do though, Sandy, you had your hand up earlier. Do you have a question for Bree?
Yes, two questions. Going back to the cabin, Bree, I understand that there isn't anything that could be promised one way or another if BLM were to own the property. But my question is, are there other BLM monument lands that there are historic structures on, or would this be somehow trying to create an exception to understand the likelihood of what would it be based on? Just resources to restore it, or whether or not it would be approved by policy?
First, thank you for rescuing me from myself there and getting us back on track. Yeah, so, you know, here in the National Monument, we have 2 historic lighthouses, which are historic districts. And so we have local protocol, and I think, you know, our management plan addresses those areas and how we're going to manage them. And so it gives us a pretty good model for any other potential historic acquisitions. And so certainly, and the Department of Interior itself is very familiar with managing historic structures. So that part of it is not the issue. I think, you know, like I said before, regardless of who owns it, I think it is sort of just a practicality issue based on the conditions on the ground and the resources that we can bring to bear.
Thank you. Second question, could you just speak a little bit to, this was the first that I heard about potentially creating housing there for an on-site person. I think that this would be important for us to know part of your vision of what that would entail, knowing that it may not ever happen, but if it were to happen, what are you envisioning there?
Yeah, yeah, and of course, this is just like my random thoughts about like my dream, dream site. But we would get together and brainstorm as a community to figure out where we would even start and thinking about what would finally be there. But yeah, I think it would be a really great site, because it has the infrastructure that is needed for the most part. So like support an RV pad, or something similar where we could have a temporary domicile there, that would support, both seasonal employees and potentially new employees coming into the area while they transition and find housing, because that is extremely challenging. And we've had people who declined the position based on their inability to find housing. And so, both I think us and the National Park Service are really looking into this, issue hard, as well as like every other organization and business, right, in the community, how we can manage this. And I think there are potential things we could do with this property there that would support that part of our mission, which is actually pretty critical to, keeping this place staffed up and keeping, our eye on the prize, which is preservation, conservation. Yeah, but I don't know if it would work out or if it would be appropriate, but I think just like initial indications and how I think about it in my mind, it would be really cool. Having, some on-site presence there. So let's say we had 2 side-by-side pads, and one of them was our seasonal and one of them was, a volunteer in the monument program, like very similar to what the VIPs are in the park, where they would be out on the land every day interpreting the values that are there, which I think like Whatnot Edition, it just needs to be interpreted because there are just so many stories to tell.
Sandy, is that it?
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay, now I'd like to recognize, we have, it looks like 2 members of the public online who would like to comment or ask questions. And I'll recognize Tino Villaluz. Tino?
Yeah, thank you guys. Thank you for the opportunity to be engaged in this. I don't have any real specific comments. I do want to dig a little deeper into the resource management plan, as well as just be a little more involved. I think, it would be cavalier for me to provide real comments now because my breadth of knowledge is just in the presentation today and I haven't dug deep enough into it, but I would like to be engaged and be a part of these talks going forward. So I appreciate the time today and look forward to a future engagement. Thank you.
Thank you. And there will be an opportunity for you and other members of the public to comment to us in writing.
Yeah. So I guess the other thing, I probably should introduce myself more formally. Tino Villaluz, Swinomish Tribal Community Wildlife Program Manager. So yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you. And I see another member of the public. I don't see a name, but
Tracy.
Oh, Tracy Cottingham.
Are you able to hear me?
Yes.
All right, I'm out on our boat, so not as remote as Krista, but over on beautiful Vancouver Island. I won't turn on my video. I don't want to be cut off, but I wasn't going to give public comments today until we had heard from Bree, and also next week on the 27th, there is a MAC meeting. It will be virtual, and I'm sure Bree will be, part of the agenda is to be reviewing everything that's been said so far. Bree, your presentation today was incredible. I took a bunch of notes, and your view just really lines up, I think, with what the community and what the land bank is also looking for. And I also want to thank Peg bringing up alternative possibilities that could involve these partnerships, could involve far more just ways that we bring the strengths of both the land bank, preservation trust, BLM, National Monument, the tribes all together. So I think that conversation hopefully will continue in a big way. I also know how the grant project works. Oh, I should also say I am a MAC member. I've been on the MAC for about 5 years. I had the front row seat of working through the proposed resource management plan and the final approved management plan. And I am currently hold the position of cultural and heritage, which certainly covers our lighthouses and the cultural resources, all encompassing. So the resource management plan, Bree, you stated very well how the BLM listened to the public, listened to the tribes, listened to the governor and the governor consistency review. What needs to be brought up here is we eked by and had that signed during the current administration. There was a real worry that it would have been signed in the past administration, and not speaking for the MAC as a MAC member here, but it was a huge fear that what was proposed was certainly in keeping with the secretarial orders of the last administration. And those secretarial orders leaned on dispersed camping heavily, recreation, target practice, hunting, those things that those secretarial orders, I believe those have been undone by the current administration. So we eked by delaying and delaying, and I can go into further, but there was talk of taking legal action against the government by private groups, if in fact some of those items stayed in the resource management plan. Thankfully, we were able to pass that through this last winter. So that piece, it's locked in now with the management plan, and we're super pleased. The MAC is in agreement that most everything that was desired by the community was put in there. So in terms of the other job I take care of is the Peytos Island Lighthouse. And for any of you that are familiar with both the Turnpoint site and the Peytos site, the Turnpoint, the keeper's quarters, built in the 1880s, 1890s, the keeper's quarters, their same plan, the same structure was out at Peytos Island. At the point that it became too expensive to keep up or too many repairs, and the keepers who actually wanted modern triplex modular units, it went into disrepair and was burned down by the Orcas Fire Department, possibly in the 60s. And to think
Tracy, I think we lost you. Tracy, are you still there?
What did you say? Come about.
I just cannot believe that was allowed then. So I'm mentioning because of the if there's a again, Peg? Yes? Can you're still able to hear me?
You're intermittent, Tracy. Let me ask you this. I think it would be helpful if you would, yeah, okay. No, I will say the same thing in general. I'm sorry that we didn't have as many members of the Lopez public here today, hear Bree's statement, who attended last week's meeting. And I hope we can get the recording of this meeting up online so it can get out to as many folks as quickly as possible. For anybody else who might be listening, we will be accepting written comments through our next monthly meeting, which is on October. Anybody have the date? Third Thursday in October, in any case.
Friday.
Friday, sorry.
That's one.
All right, October 20th, we're getting there. And we will have more discussion. I think that the commission will be heading toward a decision on the Whatnot property at that time. So we would welcome comments from the public, written comments, anytime up till that time. Comments can be directed toward Tanya.
Yes, they could definitely come to me. Would you like to have them cut off a little earlier though, so you'll have time to read them? Because the 20th,
I think that would make good sense and be helpful to the commission.
how about the
So-
Friday before? I'll put that in the note.
We can include it in the materials.
Yeah,
that sounds good. Let's do
Okay.
that. So, do you have a date on that, Tanya?
it was
It would be the 13th.
October 13th, the Friday prior to the meeting. That's a great day. Friday.
Okay.
So Tanya,
Good.
will you summarize those comments that you've already gotten and will be getting?
I
Will you get
will,
some? I don't know how that's done.
I won't summarize them. I will pass them all. I keep them all in a folder and
Okay.
then I can pass them on. Maybe it'd be easier if you get a chunk at a time. So, so for after this meeting, send off what we have. And it's all PDF so that you
Okay.
can read everyone in full and you have their names.
Sounds
Okay.
good.
Yeah,
That'd be helpful.
okay. I'll
Thank
make a
you.
note of that too. Thank you for that.
Okay,
I have a question for Lincoln,
Marilyn.
which I've already asked him, and I'm gonna ask him again. I just want to verify that the two grants that we, are lined up for, if we don't make a decision until October 20th, are we putting those grants in any jeopardy?
I don't believe so. The last conversation I had with them, we were really hopeful that we could come to a decision in September. But, I'm gonna have to have another round of conversation with them, and I think they'll be understanding, particularly because we were hoping to have more, tribal comment than we've gotten. So I think it really makes sense for us to see if we can get that, and it's just gonna take a little bit more time. I'll let you know if there's some critical issue, if they draw up line in the sand, we can have an emergency meeting.
And that's why I just want to clarify that therefore public comments might be, received in a shorter period of time if we end up having to have a special meeting, make an emergency decision.
Yeah, I think that, that's a good idea.
But it sounds like that's probably not going to happen.
Right, I just, I'm just always afraid
Contingency.
something.
Right. Okay, what I'd like to do is this is an important question for all of us. Bree is here and has made an important statement, so I'd like to preempt the outreach and stewardship report and see if there's any more discussion among the commissioners this morning.
I have my hand up, Brian, but just so
Please.
you know.
Thank you. Go
Me?
ahead. Lead it off.
Okay. Okay, yeah, it was going back to what Marilyn just brought up. I want to understand, I really hate making important consequential decisions under short timelines without all of the information, without everything being able to be totally explored. So with that, I guess I would ask Lincoln, can you better explain if, for example, we were to accept the grants and if the land bank was not renewed and we were to at that point consider resale, what would ever happen if we accepted grants and then later decided to resell?
It depends on the grant program. And I'd really have to look at the details. In a lot of cases, that's a very difficult proposition, honestly, to accept a grant and then want to sell the property off. A lot of times, the granting agency requires you to replace it with an equal property. If you're gonna have to sell property off, and so that would create a very, very difficult situation, I would say. So I don't really think, honestly, that if the grants are accepted, then going back and trying to sell the property at that point is possible. It could be that you could convey the property to the BLM with the restrictions imposed by the grant so that BLM could manage it, but I would not see the land bank getting any money out of that kind of transaction.
Understood. And where we're at financially now is if we were to receive the grant, that would make up all but about $1 million of our purchase price. Is that right?
Right.
Okay, thank you.
I want to reiterate another important thing that Lincoln mentioned is that an important part of our decision, I think, is going to be to hear the input of tribal representatives. And I appreciate that Tino is here and listening this morning. I hope that between now and next month, we'll have other more formal comments from tribal members. So.
I have a subject to raise, but I also need to point out that I have to leave at the appointed ending time today. I'm sorry that I will call in to Zoom.
I think we all do.
Oh, okay. One of the things, I did attend the meeting last week in person of Ron Lopez, took notes, I reviewed my notes of all the comments, and one of the things that I've noticed is although there was some concern about BLM in the whole previous chapter, what really came through for me was the effort of the community to let the land bank know how much they appreciated the job that they're doing. And there was a lot of praise for how the land bank responds to the local community. It has nothing to do with BLM. It only has to do, in my mind, with the land bank and how that plays out in the future as we go through this renewal process. That's a subject that's of a lot of concern to me. It's sort of a side issue in some ways, but it's also core for us. So I just, despite what people might have said about the BLM, there was a lot of positive feedback about the land bank, which I thought was important.
I guess I would add to that, Marilyn, that from what I heard of last week's meeting, there was also in that support, which I agree with you completely and was gratified to hear, there was also a lot of implicit, how shall I put this? Pressure that the Lopez community was key to the support of the land bank in our last reauthorization and wants to be again, but it may be contingent on our decision.
I didn't feel threatened personally. But I think every decision that we make right now is really gonna be focused on for the next period of time before the renewal, because this is what's current in people's minds.
So I think that.
I want to weigh in on that because I agree with Brian.
Please, Peggy.
I think there's great support for the land bank on Lopez, and I think this is a really critical point. This is a really critical juncture.
Oh, yeah.
So to hear them, but I also think, we are inviting and hoping to hear input from the tribes. And so again, we're at a juncture. We want to make sure that we're seen as being really supportive.
It's clear to me that Lopez understands that we exist today because of them last vote, and that we should know that, and they want us to know that. It's clear to me that they want local control over that property. How that's defined is up it is yet to be decided. Came into this meeting not thinking I would have much regard for what that meant to the BLM. But I think your presentation was excellent. You have a great background. And pleased that you're here. The issue for me is that we have this $1.5 million deadline, so to speak. And we have this public relations issue with regard to whatever we might decide to do. We owe it to, it's because Lopez, they're the owners. I mean, it's their land, they live in it. And we ought to be respectful of that to the extent that we ought to be doing everything we can to meet their desires. In all that, it's difficult for me to see anything happen by October. Unless we can find a way to make a decision that allows us to further investigate. I think BLM has got pretty long-term things that, I mean, you don't do anything over the weekend. It's all, years. So it's going to be very difficult and complex. But for me, the most important thing is Lopesians have to know we're doing what they want because it's what we want as a commission and as a monument, as an area. And I think that's going to be the biggest challenge for us, is really explaining regularly how we're moving along on this so that they have comfort that we are considering seriously their needs. So I don't know how we do this timing wise. To me, that's difficult. Without the grants order, I think we could do it, but that is something that I think that's with a couple of questions you got, Lincoln, is that needs to be the first thing we get through is, how do we keep those grants as an option? Because if we lose them, that option goes away. Okay, sorry.
And having not had a lot of travel input into this conversation, I had one conversation yesterday with someone I know here, who pointed out that she felt that the decision that was made when I first listed him last winter about not allowing camping opportunity for a tribal activity was, I completely understand why we said, no, we're not ready for this, because we're not ready for this. We have no plan in place. We have no mechanism to do these types of things. But that had created some consternation among, she felt, is one person talking, among some tribal people about the land bank's receptivity to use. And I just want to make it really clear from my perspective that if we do go forward owning this property, we absolutely need to create these systems in place so that we are making these properties available for these commission groups. Regardless of even the size of this property, I think this is a new mandate for the land bank. Because this is the real world, this is where the world's going. So anyway, I appreciate that we don't have nearly the depth of knowledge or experience as BLM does. I get that completely. And I think we're gonna have to figure it out somehow or other.
I agree, that's a key consideration. And kind of where the rubber meets the road is where we're trying to go. Anybody else?
That's crazy.
It looks like Tracy is back. Tracy, can you hear us?
I can. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. So thanks for letting me back in. I'm not sure where you last heard me. I'm going to worry about a new question I have to Lincoln.
Tracy,
Yep.
pardon. We need to ask you to be quick because we need to adjourn the meeting in about 4 minutes. Tracy, hello? Came about it.
Okay, so it's a little choppy, but this question is for Lincoln on the grants, and thank you, Sandy, for asking what happens if we have to give the grant money back. Lincoln, what happens if we don't accept the grants this term and reapply for those same grants for the next round? That's the question.
I don't know.
That's the answer.
I mean, basically, we go back into the pool. I'm not sure how the granting agency would react to that idea. At a minimum, we'd just be in the same quite competitive process all over again.
And had you held back from North Shore grants to focus on the Watmow edition?
Yes.
So that answers my question, that putting this money back in the pool is not a good thing for the land bank.
No, I would not regard that as a good thing.
Okay, so that's my answer to my question, and that's on top of what Sandy's inquiry was. So thank you. I really think that this is too short of a term to get the input from the tribes. The MAC will be weighing in on it as a potential for next week. So stay tuned. Thank you all.
My very last thing, can we arrange a special meeting early in October, assuming that we don't have a critical grant deadline approaching, at which we could again open the door to tribal input so that we're clear that we have it before the point at which we ultimately, I'd like to recheck our dates as far as what's the latest, can we make this work, and do we need to talk some more in person or on Zoom? We could do it on Zoom. But that might mean changing the deadline for public comment if we do end up needing to shorten this time frame.
I think the door is open, has been open to tribal input, and Lincoln has been trying to
Yes,
make contact, so if it happens, maybe we can take that in.
yeah, and maybe it won't happen. I respect that Lincoln's been working on this. I'm not trying to say there's anything he's missed. I get that.
You take that as it comes.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at my schedule. If you needed to have a emergency meeting in the first week of October, I could do that.
After the first thing is to determine the grant flexibility.
And that would be assuming that we had tribal participation in that, or, but I also can imagine even just the land bank commissioners need more time to talk about this.
Yeah. Well, it would have to be in a special meeting anyway. The other possibility is Lincoln and or other staff could, and in fact, a couple of commissioners could meet with tribal representatives without having to arrange a meeting if that happens. I mean, there are ways to deal with that. Okay.
Just very quickly, I'll throw it very quickly out there. I feel I would be open to us scheduling a special meeting first week of October for further discussion about this. I feel the commission to discuss collecting whatever comments we received up to that date. I feel that having this kind of, so that we're better prepared for our decision-making meeting. It feels a little bit long to wait for a commission meeting to just have this important discussion within a regular monthly meeting. Just a thought.
Or the end of September.
That's coming right up. It's
2 weeks. We have 2 more weeks in September then. Wait, and I don't know if we ever extend meetings, we extend this meeting to such and such date. I don't know if that's part of our protocol.
Well, if you want to have a special meeting, we should send out, we need to poll commission members. So that could either be the last week in September, first week in October.
Does that want to be contingent on some of your communications with the tribes?
I do not know.
I would make that contingent because I think there's no reason we can't have a full discussion at our next regular commission meeting. And unless we have additional input before that time, and Tanya can send us, as she suggested, any other input from the community. So the question is tribal response, I think.
It's also potentially agency response.
Maybe it's just that the October meeting needs to be an extended meeting. Maybe that's what I'm.
I'm wondering also, Bree, in terms of the spirit of collaboration, can you perhaps help facilitate that input from some of the tribes into this discussion?
Yeah, and so I do want to clarify, we're engaging with tribal governments.
Right.
We're speaking for their tribes, and then, I have drafted a letter, and collaborated with Lincoln, coordinated with Lincoln on that, to lay out this entire situation. Make sure that it was unbiased as possible, and we're sending it out and asking for tribal comment.
Are you co-signing that? Is
No,
that
no,
possible? No,
And that's fine.
that's fine. Okay.
No, I collaborated on this case of just making sure that I wasn't misrepresenting the situation with the land bank.
Okay. So that's helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, to be continued. And Tracy Cottingham, if you would send us a summary of the MAC meeting after you meet next week, we'd appreciate it.
I'm not listening in. Anybody can listen in.
Okay, I'm not gonna listen. Okay.
Yep.
the meeting
Oh,
is
oh.
adjourned.
Yep, I will do that. We record it. I personally record it. And I can certainly get that out to, who should I send the recording even before BLM has posted?
To Tanya, Tracy.
All right, thank you. I'll put that on the agenda. It's September 27th. The information, certainly you will find, Bree will have that. The Lopez Rocks will showcase that. And I will send an invite to Tanya so she can share that out.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Tracy.
Thank you.
Okay, our meeting is adjourned until next time.
Yeah, that's all.